Never expected a Saturday afternoon soccer game to be the moment my world split in two. My son had been playing in the Riverside Youth League for 3 years. He loved it. Every Saturday morning he'd wake up before his alarm, already dressed in his cleats by the time I got downstairs. But that particular October afternoon, when the final whistle blew and the other kids ran toward their parents with muddy jerseys and big grins, my son, he was 11, walked toward me with his shoulders pulled in and his eyes fixed on the ground. I figured it was a rough game. He'd missed a shot in the second half and I'd seen his frustration from the sideline. I put my arm around him as we walked to the truck. "You okay, bud?" "Yeah," he said. "Too fast. Too quiet." We were almost home before he spoke again. We were stopped at a red light on Callaway Drive, the radio on low, and his voice came out so small I almost didn't catch it. "Dad, can I show you something when we get inside? Not where Mum can see." I looked over at him. His jaw was tight. He was staring straight ahead at the road. "Of course," I said, "whatever you need." He waited until we were in the garage with the door closed before he pulled up the right side of his practice shirt. I saw it immediately, a bruise the size of a large hand, spreading from his lower ribs up toward his armpit, deep purple at the center, yellow-green at the edges. Not fresh. This had been there for days. Everything in me went very still. "Dylan," I said, keeping my voice as even as I could, "who did this to you?" He let his shirt drop. He wouldn't look at me. "Coach Rettler." The name landed like a stone in still water. Gerald Rettler, head coach of the Riverside Youth Soccer League. The man who had started the league 14 years ago. The man whose name was on the trophy case in the community center lobby. The man who 2 Christmases ago had organized a fundraiser that kept 3 families from losing their homes during the flooding. "Tell me what happened," I said, and he did. Slowly in pieces, with long silences where he'd press his lips together and look at the floor of the garage. The way Coach Rettler ran what he called discipline drills after practice when certain boys weren't performing well enough. How he'd grab kids by their jersey, shove them, dig his fingers into their sides and squeeze until they cried, and then tell them crying was for kids who didn't want to win. How he'd told Dylan specifically that if he ever told anyone, he'd make sure Dylan got cut from the team before regionals. That no one would believe a kid who already had a reputation for exaggerating. Dylan was not a kid who exaggerated. He was a quiet, serious boy who double-checked his homework and got nervous before birthday parties. The idea of someone targeting that specific insecurity in him, that nobody would believe you anyway, made my hands curl into fists at my sides. But I didn't let him see that. "You did the right thing telling me," I said. "Right now, today, you did the bravest thing you could have done. Okay? I need you to hear that." He finally looked up at me. His eyes were wet. He said, "You just make it worse." He was wrong. I put both hands on his shoulders. "I am going to handle this. But I need you to trust me, and I need us to go see a doctor today, not tomorrow. Today." He nodded once, small and slow. My wife had taken our daughter to her dance recital in Fresno and wasn't due back until Sunday evening. Part of me was relieved. I needed to be steady for Dylan right now, and I knew if she'd been there and seen what I saw in that garage, we'd both have been destroyed at the same moment. We needed one of us functional. I drove him to the urgent care clinic on Mesa Boulevard. The doctor on duty was a quiet, methodical man named Dr. Alderman, mid-50s, deliberate in his movements, the kind of doctor who takes his time and doesn't waste words. He examined Dylan thoroughly, took photographs of the bruising, asked careful questions in a calm voice that made Dylan relax in a way I was grateful for. When he pulled me into the hallway afterward, his expression was measured but serious. "These are consistent with repeated blunt force trauma to the torso," he said. "The varying stages of healing suggest this has been happening over a period of 3 to 6 weeks. I'm required by California law to file a report with Child Protective Services. I'd also strongly recommend you contact local police tonight, not tomorrow. The person who did this is his youth soccer coach, I said, Gerald Rattler. Dr. Alderman was quiet for a moment. The Gerald Rattler who started the Riverside League. Yes. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Then I want you to be prepared for some friction. Men like that have deep roots in a community. Deep roots make people want to believe there's been a mistake. He wasn't wrong. When Detective Haynes arrived at the clinic to take Dylan's statements, I watched his face carefully while Dylan spoke. Haynes was professional. He was thorough. But when Dylan said the name, I saw it. A subtle stillness, the kind that comes when someone is rearranging what they expected to hear. After Dylan finished, Haynes stepped into the hallway with me. Mr. Whitmore, he said, I want to be out front with you. Gerald Rattler is someone a lot of people in this department know personally. He runs fundraisers for the PBA every year. He's coached kids whose parents are officers. I'm not saying that changes what I'm going to do with this report. I'm saying it may affect the speed of things. How long is this going to take? I asked. The investigation will open, but without corroborating witnesses or additional physical evidence, it may be difficult to move forward on this alone. He's 11 years old with bruises across his ribs. I understand. A long pause. I'll file tonight. I drove Dylan home, got him showered, made him a grilled cheese because it was the only thing he asked for, and sat with him at the kitchen table while he ate. He was quieter than usual, but he ate the whole sandwich and that somehow felt important. After he was in bed, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time. I'm a licensed electrician. I own a small contracting business. 4 employees, mostly residential work. Nothing glamorous. I don't have a law degree. I don't have connections at City Hall. What I have is 17 years of problem solving on job sites, a strong preference for documentation over assumption, and a deep, habitual suspicion of anything that can't be verified. I opened my laptop. Gerald Rattler had a clean public record. The Riverside League's website had 43 photos of him with kids, trophies, check presentations to local charities. His name appeared in the local paper regularly, glowing, untouchable. And then, on a neighborhood Facebook group I found through 3 degrees of connections, a post from 7 months ago, a woman named Pam, whose last name I couldn't see, had written, "Does anyone else feel like the coaching methods in the youth league have gotten too physical? My son came home with marks on his arm last spring, and when I asked Coach R about it, he said it was from a ball impact. Has anyone else seen this?" There were 6 replies. 4 told her she was being oversensitive. 1 said the league had the best record in the county. 1 private message had apparently been sent because Pam commented back, "Thanks for reaching out. Talk to you privately." Pam had never posted in that group again. I spent the next 2 hours building a list. Every parent I could identify whose kid had been on the team in the past 3 seasons. I found them through the league's own newsletter archive, the team photos on the website, school's social media accounts. The next morning, I started making calls. I didn't lead with what happened to Dylan. I asked about the season, about how their kids were feeling about soccer, whether they'd noticed any changes. Most conversations went nowhere. 2 mothers were enthusiastic about Rattler. 1 father told me his son had quit the team mid-season and didn't want to talk about it. That father's name was Andrew. He lived on the east side of town. I asked if I could come by. He met me on his front porch. His son, 13 now, had quit the team 8 months ago and started seeing a therapist. Andrew had noticed bruising once, but his son had said it was from sliding tackles. Then his son stopped sleeping, started refusing to go to school on days when he knew practice was happening, eventually told Andrew he hated soccer and wanted to quit. "I thought it was just burnout," Andrew told me. "He looked like he hadn't slept well in months." You know how kids are. He'd been so passionate about it and then suddenly, nothing. I figured 13 is when boys start to check out of things they used to love. I never pushed him. Has he said anything to you about why he quit? Andrew was quiet for a moment. He said Coach Rettler scared him. He wouldn't go further than that. We let it go because we thought pushing would make it worse. I told him what Dylan had told me. I watched Andrew's face go through several things in rapid succession. Disbelief. Anger. Something that looked like guilt, but probably wasn't. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Whatever it takes," I said, "but I need people willing to be counted." I found 3 more families before the week was out. A 10-year-old who'd started flinching whenever his father raised the hand to high-five him. A 12-year-old who'd asked his mother if hitting someone to make them better at something was allowed. A boy who'd wet his bed twice and told his parents it was because of school stress, which didn't make sense because his grades were fine. I wrote it all down. Every family, every detail, dates where I had them. Then I did something I'm not entirely proud of, but I'd do it again without hesitation. I knew the community center where the team practice stored all its internal communications, scheduling, equipment requests, incident logs on a shared server that used a third-party management platform. These platforms often run on default credentials for years because nobody thinks to change them. It's the same careless thing I see in electrical panels where someone installs a system and the next contractor assumes the first guy did the security setup. I found the platform's admin portal in 20 minutes. The credentials were the system default. I was in. There was an incident log. 18 months of entries. Most were mundane. Equipment damage, field permits, insurance renewal. But buried in the entries from 16 months ago, a note filed internally by the community center's operations manager. Parent complaint received regarding physical contact during practice, forwarded to league board for review. Below it 2 weeks later, board reviewed. Coach Rettler provided written explanation. Complaint closed. No action required. The name of the parent who had filed it wasn't listed, but the date matched the time period when Pam had posted on Facebook and then gone silent. I copied everything. Made 4 backups. Kept one on my phone, one on a USB, 2 in cloud storage under an account nobody knew I had. My wife came home Sunday evening and I told her everything at the kitchen table while Dylan was asleep. I watched her face carefully. She's a pediatric occupational therapist. She works with kids who have sensory and behavioral challenges, and she has a particular way of listening when something is genuinely serious. She doesn't react. She goes very quiet and very still, and behind her eyes something is processing and categorizing and reaching conclusions before she speaks. "How many kids?" she asked when I finished. "At least 5 that I've confirmed. Probably more. Dylan's not going back to that field." "No, he's not. And we're not waiting on Detective Haynes." "No," I said. "We're not." The Riverside Parks and Recreation Department held a public meeting on the 2nd Wednesday of every month to discuss community programs and funding. It was the kind of meeting that usually drew 12 people and a reporter from the local paper, who left after 20 minutes. We brought 47. My wife had spent 3 days quietly reaching out to the other families, not pushing, not pressuring, just sharing what we knew and asking if they wanted to be heard. Andrew came. 3 of the other families came. 2 mothers whose sons had quietly quit the program in the past year came. Unsure yet whether they had a story to tell, but willing to listen. I came with a folder. Dylan was home with my sister-in-law. He knew where we were going and what we were doing, and he'd given me a long, careful hug before we left. When the public comment period opened, I walked to the podium. "My name is Ray Whitmore," I said. Then I stopped. I had planned the careful, measured opening, the kind of thing my lawyer friend had helped me draft over the phone the night before. Factual, non-inflammatory, legally defensible. Instead I said, "My 11-year-old son plays soccer in this community's youth league. 3 weeks ago he showed me bruises across his ribs and told me his coach had given them to him. Tonight I'm here because that coach is Gerald Rettler, and my son is not the only child he has hurt." The room reacted. People turned in their seats. Someone near the back made a sound like they'd been struck. The department director, a woman named Patricia Voss, reached for her microphone. "Mr. Whitmore, these are very serious allegations." "They are," I said, "which is why I have medical documentation of my son's injuries, photographs taken by a licensed physician, a CPS report filed on his behalf, and a police report currently under investigation." I held up the folder. "I also have a record of a parent complaint against Coach Rettler that was filed with this league's board 16 months ago and quietly closed without any notification to parents or the community." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've heard in a room full of people. Andrew stood up next and talked about his son. Then one of the mothers talked about her boy flinching. One by one, the parents who'd been holding these small private worries in isolation began to speak them into the air of that fluorescent-lit meeting room, and something shifted, the way a structure shifts when you remove the thing that had been keeping it in a particular shape. Rettler was in the third row. I'd seen him when I walked in. He'd sat with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and I thought, he came here expecting to weather this, expecting the system to hold the way it always had. He stood up when the room was at its loudest. "I've given 14 years to this league," he said. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. "I've given these kids more than any of you know. This is a personal attack from a parent whose kid isn't performing. My son has bruises on his ribs," I said. I didn't raise my voice. "Let's talk about that specifically." He sat back down. The meeting ran 2.5 hours. By the end, the department director had committed to an independent review of the league, the immediate suspension of Rettler pending the outcome of the police investigation, and a review of the incident log procedures that had allowed a complaint to be buried without community notification. 2 days later, Detective Haynes called me. 4 more families came forward after the meeting, he said. "We've obtained a warrant. We're moving forward." "What changed?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "When something's private, it can be managed. When it's public, it's different. You made it public." The search of Rettler's home and his car produced records he'd kept about specific players, handwritten notes with observations about which kids were soft, which had parents who weren't involved, which ones were coachable under pressure. The language was clinical in a way that made my skin crawl when I read the excerpts in the police report summary months later. He had been selecting, deliberately and methodically selecting the children he believed were least likely to be believed. Dylan, Andrew's son, a boy whose parents had recently separated and whose father lived 3 hours away, a boy with a learning difference who'd struggled to explain things clearly. A boy who idolized Rettler the way kids idolize coaches who make them feel chosen. Gerald Rettler was arrested on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after Dylan showed me those bruises in the garage. He was charged with 8 counts of felony child abuse and 3 counts of assault. As the investigation expanded, 2 more victims came forward, boys who had since moved out of the area. The total reached 11. The trial was 8 months later. My wife and I attended every day. Dylan wasn't required to testify in person. They used a recorded interview instead, conducted in a low room with a stuffed bear on the table and a woman trained specifically in trauma interviewing, and I watched the recording once and then never again because once was enough. Rettler's defense attorney was aggressive. He attacked the credibility of the children, suggested mass suggestion among families who'd coordinated their stories, questioned the chain of custody on the internal documents I'd obtained, which led to a tense morning in the courtroom where my attorney stood up and argued that the documents' contents were verifiable regardless of how they were obtained. The judge allowed it. The jury deliberated for 11 hours, guilty on 9 of 11 counts. The judge sentenced Rettler to 18 years. The league board resigned collectively the following week. The community center's operations manager, who had written the initial incident log entry and then never followed up, was reassigned. The City Council passed new mandatory reporting requirements for all youth sports programs operating on public facilities, something that 3 different parents' advocacy groups had requested for years and been told wasn't a priority. After the sentencing, I sat in the truck for a long time in the courthouse parking lot. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. No relief. Not yet. Just a deep, bone-level exhaustion, like someone had finally allowed me to put down something very heavy. Dylan's recovery was not a straight line. The first few months were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. He didn't want to play soccer anymore, that was the obvious thing. But he also went through a period of testing us, small defiances, picking fights about nothing. His therapist, a woman named Dr. Farrow, who specialized in childhood trauma, and who Dylan eventually started calling the lady with the plant wall, because her office was covered in houseplants, explained that this was normal. Children who've been harmed by authority figures often spend a period checking to see whether the safe adults in their lives will hold steady under pressure. We held steady. By spring, he'd joined the school's robotics club. By summer, he was laughing at his own jokes again, that ridiculous deadpan humor he'd had since he was 6 that makes no sense to anyone but still somehow lands. By the following fall, he told me one afternoon while we were washing the truck together that he thought he might want to try soccer again someday. Not with a league, he said. Maybe just pick up games with friends. Whatever you want, bud, I said. Whenever you're ready. He thought about it for a second. Dad, did you know he thought we wouldn't fight back? Yeah, I said. I think that's what he counted on. That was pretty stupid of him. He said it simply, matter-of-factly, in the same tone he'd used to say a math answer was obvious. Then he went back to scrubbing the wheel well. It took me a minute before I could trust my voice again. Andrew's son started individual therapy after the trial. He's doing better. He joined a drama program at his high school, which no one saw coming, including him. Andrew texted me a photo of the kid on stage at the fall play. Huge grin. I saved that picture. The other families have found their own rhythms. Some of them I still hear from. Some went quiet, which I understand. Healing is not a communal activity. Sometimes people need to disappear into their own lives and close the door on what happened, at least for a while. My wife and I got involved with a state-level advocacy coalition pushing for independent background screening and annual safety audits for volunteer coaches in youth sports programs. It's slow work, bureaucratic and frustrating and occasionally demoralizing, but every few months something moves, a vote, a policy update, a training requirement, and it reminds me why we're still doing it. I've thought a lot, in the 2 years since that October afternoon, about how easily this could have gone differently. If Dylan hadn't trusted me enough to say something in that truck, if I'd been dismissive or too tired or too in love with the idea of Coach Reckler being exactly who everyone said he was. If Andrew had pushed his son harder on why he'd quit and his son had clamped down. If Pam had never posted that Facebook comment and I'd never found it. If any one of those threads had been missing, the outcome could have been completely different. Children are not protected by reputation, not by community standing, not by trophies and fundraisers and 14 years of goodwill. They're protected by one thing, an adult who believes them when they finally find the courage to speak. That's not a given. It should be. It isn't. There are things I've learned that I want every parent to hold on to, not as a list, but as the kind of knowledge that settles into your bones and changes how you move through the world. Know your child's body language, not just their words, their body. My son walked toward me after that game with his shoulders pulled in and his eyes on the ground, and I noticed it immediately because I've been watching him walk toward me after games for 3 years. You can't notice a change if you don't know the baseline. Take it seriously before you're certain. I didn't wait until I had proof before I took Dylan to the doctor. I didn't need to be sure. I needed to be careful. There is a version of "let's wait and see" that protects nobody except the person doing harm. Don't fight this alone. I know the instinct is to keep it private, to protect your child from exposure, to handle it quietly and spare them further distress. I understand that instinct. I had it too. And I'm telling you, quiet is what allows this to continue. Other families are out there carrying the same silence. Find them. Teach your children the language of wrong, not just stranger danger. That's a concept from a different era that misses how most harm actually happens. Teach them that no adult who cares about them will ask them to keep secrets about their body, about pain, about fear. Teach them the specific words. This person hurt me. This person scared me. This happened to my body. Role play it if you have to. Make it ordinary enough that saying it doesn't feel impossible. And when they come to you, not if, when, put everything else down. The game on TV, the work email, the thing you were in the middle of. Put it down and give them your whole face and let them see that nothing in the world matters more in that moment than what they're about to say. Because they've been working up to that moment for longer than you know. And if they get to you and the door is even a little bit closed, they may not knock again. It's been almost 2 years now. Dylan is 13. He's grown about 4 inches and has opinions about music that I pretend to understand. Last month he came home from school and told me very casually that a kid in his class had told him a teacher had been making him uncomfortable, and Dylan had told the kid to tell his parents. And then Dylan had also quietly told the school counselor because just in case his parents didn't believe him. I didn't make a big deal of it. I told him that was the right call and asked what was for homework. But after he went upstairs, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, just standing there. There are fathers who go through something like this, and it breaks them. There are fathers who go through it and spend years angry at the wrong things or afraid of the world or unable to trust anything they can't control. I understand all of those outcomes. I don't know exactly why I came out the other side of this still able to stand in a kitchen and feel something close to peace. Maybe it's because Dylan did. Maybe because he's 13 and curious about music and looked out for a kid in his class without being asked, and still sometimes wants to come with me when I run to the hardware store on a Saturday morning just to have somewhere to go. That's my son. He's still here. He came back, and that is worth every hard thing we did to get him there. I keep coming back to one moment, not the trial, not the sentencing, not even the night Dylan showed me those bruises in the garage. I keep coming back to the drive home from the soccer field. The 20 minutes before any of it happened, when he sat next to me in the passenger seat with his shoulders pulled in and his eyes on the road and said nothing. And I noticed because I'd been watching him for 11 years and I knew what his normal looked like. That noticing was not luck, it was the accumulated result of showing up, of being present in small, unremarkable ways over a long stretch of time, so that when something was wrong, I could feel it before I could name it. I've thought about what Gerald Rettler counted on. He counted on the opposite of that. He counted on busy parents and full schedules and the quiet assumption that a trusted adult in a trusted institution would not do deliberate harm to a child. He counted on kids who couldn't find the words. He counted on the kind of silence that grows when a child doesn't believe anyone will act on what they say. What stopped him was not a system. The system, left to itself, would have processed a complaint and filed it away and kept him exactly where he was. What stopped him was a chain of choices made by ordinary people who decided that the discomfort of speaking up was less important than the cost of staying quiet. Dylan made the first choice. That one required more courage than I think I fully understood at the time. He was 11 years old, carrying something that heavy, and he found a way to say it out loud. Not to a hotline. Not to a hotline. To me, in a garage, on a Saturday. That took something in him that I don't think I can take credit for building. A basic moral clarity, a knowledge that what had been done to him was wrong, and that wrong things should be named. I don't know exactly where that came from. I know I tried to raise him that way. I know his mother did too. But at some point it became his own. It lived in him independently of us, and it held Andrew's son had something similar. It just needed more time and more safety before it could come out. That's the part people miss. The truth doesn't always arrive on your timeline. Sometimes it arrives months after a kid quits a team and starts wetting the bed again. Sometimes it arrives years later. The question is whether the adults around them built an environment where it could eventually land. The practical work matters too. The documentation, the follow-up, the willingness to go public when private channels failed. None of that happened on instinct. It happened because I stopped feeling my emotions and started thinking about what could actually move the situation forward. That's not coldness. That's a different kind of care. The kind that stays useful under pressure. What I want Dylan to carry from this, not as a wound but as something solid, is the understanding that outcomes are not random. Rattler didn't lose because the world is fair. He lost because specific people made specific choices to gather evidence, to find each other, to refuse to be managed. And Dylan was the first link in that chain. His one act of trust in a garage on a Saturday afternoon is what made every other link possible. He's 13 now, and he already knows this. I saw it in how he handled his classmate. Quietly, practically, without drama. He didn't perform heroism. He just did the next right thing and then covered the gap in case the first thing didn't hold. That's all any of us can do. And it turns out that's enough.